to review for us the previous status that you've spoken before the commissioners and that you have sought information, that sort of thing. So take it away, Heather.
So I presented to the commissioners and they asked that the Environment Committee review this. So this is part of the ongoing review. The Environment Committee also submitted a request to the city to see copies of the applications and the permits that were given to AT&T for small cell sites at Stockley, at Stockley Street. And it was emailed back to us that those permits would be presented today. So Don, is that what you have? May we see them?
Sure.
Everybody.
Well, basically, it's not the permit. What we gave, it appears it's more of a letter of authorization, basically indicating, I got a copy for everyone.
I need you at a microphone.
Okay.
Where do you want us to go?
Here, just circulate those.
Dom, who was with the permitting office.
Dom Molina, Chief Building Inspector, Building and Licensing. And basically what we have, since we don't have anything really in place, well, we have review and made sure that at least from our review, that the applicant was complying with the requirements for us issuing, in this case, an approval of a permit. And in general, what we issue was as you have circulating before you, that we circulated the application among all the affected departments. We receive comments from the police chief and from the director of public works, and basically they did not view that they had any impact. So we proceeded to issue the approvals for the small cell antennas for 1 Stockley Street in the right-of-way and 500 Bayer Avenue on the right-of-way. And there's, based on the ordinance, we had to assess a $250 fee for each. And that's where we're at. We have a check. They have not picked up their permits yet, but we do have checks.
They paid, in other words.
Yes, they pay. So that's where we're at.
Are those copies of the permit applications on the
No,
permits that we requested?
they're the copies that they submitted to us.
So that's the permit application?
No, that's the permit documents that were submitted to us. We don't have a formalized process at this point for intake, because our immune system is not capable of doing that. Because there was a time dimension in responding to them, I think it was, 30 days? We had to respond to them in 30 days. We had to invent a process until we could electronically insert it into what we have as immune system.
Okay, so the city does not have a permit application in place for small cell wireless
That's
communication
correct.
facilities. Okay.
That we're working on
So
that.
AT&T submitted this document and then this was your approval?
That's the approval.
Okay. Would you mind if I ask you guys both some questions
Sure.
about that process?
I hope I can answer them.
Yes. Well, because this doesn't quite have information I was hoping for. So who is the applicant? Is it AT&T or is it a subsidiary or it's actually AT&T?
Correct. Let me get those documents. Excuse me.
Okay. And do you know what date they applied and what date the permit was actually approved?
Well, what you have with you, they were approved on February 21st.
Okay.
What you have.
And do you know what date they applied?
Give me a minute.
30 days before. 29, I guess. 29 and a half. Right.
I would say they both came in concurrently. So we received the documentation January 29th.
Okay.
2020.
And can you tell me the exact location? Because there are multiple poles. I don't know if you want me to put this on
Well,
the
the
thing so
only-
everyone can see it. There are multiple poles.
I
This
got
is
you.
one
Okay.
of them.
Can you throw that up, Ann, for me on the board? Yeah.
So do you have a drawing that shows the exact location of the poles?
I have the plans.
No, the
This
screen.
is good.
Is it that one? That would be the most likely candidate. Okay, so if you could show us the exact location, that would be helpful. Question number 2 is, did anybody at the city have a meeting with the applicant before submitting the permit request? So did anybody meet with you prior to submitting this request for a permit
I
application?
don't know if they have, because I've been out since, I was out from November. I just returned, I was on medical leave in February. I suspect there were discussions and meetings.
Did anyone else have meetings with them?
They came last fall, I think, Kevin, and were indicated that they were going to submit for 2 locations.
Okay.
Weren't specific about where or where they were going to hang that kind of
Were these requests or these discussions part of the comprehensive plan that the city has? Are they mentioned in the comprehensive plan?
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. Was any of this information made available to residents as far as where these were supposed to go? Do you guys know if the engineering review that AT&T paid the city for included information on the applicant meeting FCC Bulletin 65 requirements? Was an environmental assessment provided, an environmental impact statement prepared per Bulletin 65? Was an environmental statement or engineering statement submitted?
It's sort of engineering documents with the submittal, with the permit.
Okay. Do you know if the applicant did any site testing prior to submitting the application?
Again, I don't know.
Okay. Does the application detail what frequency will be transmitted and how many antenna will be in the small WCF? In other words, do you know if it's 4G LTE or do you know if it's 5G?
There is, it's 5G, I believe.
5G, only 5G, and you're sure of that?
Right.
100% sure.
Because there's been, only because there have been discussion about this 5G installation.
Can you tell me if it's certain in those documents that they will only be using
Let me pull them out.
5G transmitter?
While there's a break in the action and Dawn was looking through those papers, I just wanted to remind folks here that Heather has taken on this issue by herself pretty much. The rest of us don't really know as much as she does about wireless communications facilities, and she's running up against probably some very powerful forces who want to move the 5G program forward, and I salute her for being that brave. I don't know that I would have that sort of courage myself. So
You can see the 5G Nokia.
So there are 4 antennas that are mentioned here.
On 500 battery.
Okay, so one is labeled as 5G, the other are not labeled as far as what frequency they will be transmitting. So there are 4 antennas, one of them is 5G. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we don't know what the other 4 are.
No,
And you've approved this permit and you don't know what they are.
that's correct.
So they could be 4G,
I need you at Mark.
Yeah.
so they could be 4G transmitters, the type that are normally put on towers 250 feet tall?
Let me say this. You could ask me a million questions about the building code, but in this arena, I'm absolutely ignorant. If you tell me what goes into building a tower, I could answer that, but ask me anything else, I can't answer that.
Excuse me, I have to jump in here. I just, Dom and Kevin and the city, they're being put in a really tough position here. And I don't mind the questions, but I have to defend what these guys are doing here because, you know, the regulations, sorry. Lisa Schlosser, they are just doing what, look, as you know, the municipalities have very little say in this. We have a federal regulation that lays out exactly what we have to do and can do and can't do. And so they are very limited in what they can approve or disapprove. So I think maybe Dom, doesn't have all the specifications, but to be honest, that's how our ordinance reads. That's how the federal regulations read. So it's not really their call, I think, to know all this at this point. We cannot, by law right now, disapprove an antenna. We just can't. If it meets our basic ordinances, we can't do it. I mean, we can't. It's how the federal, if you read the federal regulation front and back, we've consulted lawyers. This is a very strict, by the book. The telecom providers worked with the FCC, and they pretty much have a lot of latitude here. So I just want to say that on these guys' behalf, and I mean, not that you can't speak for yourselves, but I want to put the lay of the legal landscape over this discussion. So that's where we are right now
Thank you,
on
Lisa.
this.
I would note that Commissioner Schlosser is probably the most knowledgeable commissioner on this topic that we have. Is that fair to say, Lisa?
I mean, who knows? It goes so fast. But I did, my last job was as the federal deputy chief information officer. So we worked with a lot of these entities before these new regulations were put in place, I must say. So I probably am knowledgeable in general, but spent a lot of time in our ordinance looking at what we can or can't do. And this is it's very strict and very limited what municipalities can do at this point. So that's where we are.
Yes,
So
thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, thank you for that. And this certainly is not meant as anything personal, but I will point out that the city's ordinance 270-46.1.2, which was just revised in November, does make you, Don, the person that signs off on these permit applications. So you would be the natural person to ask. I do have a list of more technical questions here that I'd like to go through, but I would also, in rebuttal to that, like to point out that while the restrictions are strict, and they have been made stricter more recently, it does not preclude AT&T from having to meet those same requirements. So FCC does have requirements on radio frequency that must be met per their Bulletin 65, and it is our obligation as the city to ensure our residents that those are met, and that is what my questions are concerning. So in order to meet those requirements, there needs to be some sort of testing. There needs to be some sort of documentation, and I'm getting the feeling that we don't have that. So I'm also getting ahead of myself. So what would you like me to do with the remainder of my questions? Would you like me to submit them more formally? I feel these questions, that the residents of Rehoboth need to have the answers to these questions to know that these things are being used and put in place in accordance with the FCC. So would you like me to submit these more formally?
My
I don't
position
know
is,
how it's supposed
if
to
I
work.
have an obligation where the applicant has to submit all this information, I need to be informed. Okay? I don't have any problems with
I understand.
I do that with everybody. They need to provide information for me to be satisfied to write off.
Right.
I thought this was going to be pro forma that they submitted and I signed off. I'm learning something new today, and I'm not objecting to do it.
That's news
But
too.
as we move forward, I do urge, since let me put it, you got a good 10 months of me. 10 months, so it's the next person that needs to be trained as well, and I could help facilitate that needs to be brought in to do this as well.
I think it would certainly be in order for the city to have some type of permit application process that you can follow in
I'm
order
with
to
you.
be able to do
I'm
your
with
job.
you on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's certainly not in place here.
We haven't gone that far.
Yeah. So I guess I would ask, just in general, so are we establishing that the city doesn't have anything in place to meet these
Yes,
FCC
you have
guidelines?
established a record. That's what you have. That the city does not have a process in place other than what I have explained.
Can I ask a question? So you, Heather, are asking questions based on what you think that process should look like, correct?
I don't really know what it exactly should look like, but I do know that there are FCC guidelines that have to be met. I've read them. They're very extensive, and they have this nice picture on there. And I've read them all,
Right.
and they have to be met. So
And that's
just
where
because,
is that where your questions came from?
yes, because just because we have an obligation to approve these things, as you mentioned, we also have the same obligation to
Right.
ensure that these requirements are met. And that's what I would like to know before this goes up in front of, within 27 feet, if that's the pole, of someone's house, that we have met all the FCC guidelines. That's what I'm trying to ensure.
Right. And I sort of agree with Lisa. I think that honestly, you're coming at it a little bit where it sounds accusatory to us versus how do we get everybody that's going to be doing this knowing what the right thing to do is. We do have a lot of, we're hogged. Oh no, terrible word. We're tied in some ways, but yet sometimes I think things go through with the assumption that the people that are pushing it through are doing the right thing. And you are trying to say, hey, maybe we need to back this up and really look at how these permits look. Yeah.
I think we need to.
Also,
I'll add,
I was just gonna say, we got a email from somebody saying that one thing the city can do is have, put it in your zoning code, at least in terms of, we could regulate to some degree the location of these things.
Right, and I know that that's what your handout
Yeah,
suggested.
so
too.
I don't know that we can
Mhm.
ask the city to review whether they comply with the federal regulations and the FCC bulletins, because the FCC is supposed to do that, but I guess maybe one path is to see what is it a municipality has legal authority to do, and
Yeah.
look into whether we could do more than, than what we're doing.
Or help the city write it.
I think some of a draft of that is in your
Right.
documents,
Yeah.
some suggestions for doing that.
Right.
I would note that I've asked Glenn Mandelis, our city solicitor, to appear today to advise us legally on what we can and cannot do. I don't see that he's arrived yet, but it may be he'll come later.
I guess I was wondering if we could just, even though you've already awarded the permits, if we can hold off for, I mean, maybe 3 more months or something like that, so the city so we really could study this and see if we've met the FCC requirements. Is that possible?
I don't think so, right? I'm gonna defer to Glenn, but I don't think we're in that position right now. However, there is something that popped out that I think we can do, and that is to make sure that in all the issuance of the permits, at a minimum right now, at least, say, this permit is issued based on the fact that you meet all FCC safety regulations in accordance with, I'm not sure the number, that, and I get that that's like, not the optimum way, but at least that's something.
Maybe a bit of a stall.
It's a little bit of putting the onus on them, and maybe even say in the permit itself, your acceptance of this permit, ensures that, basically says that you certify that you meet all the FCC regulations. So maybe there's something like that we could do process-wise, at least in the interim while we continue to study this more. So that's what I think we could do in the interim. But I'd have to talk to Sharon and Dom and others, but I'm willing maybe with Charlie to go do that, and Dick, and see if that's something we can add in. At least, again, I know it's not solving all the problems, I know it's a little bit of, I get it, but it's something. So maybe we can do that, unless it already says that. I'm sorry, I haven't looked at the permit approval or the permit itself, but does it say something like that?
You didn't get a copy.
It's okay, I don't need a copy, but I'm just wondering.
I would like a copy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
With something to start with.
We may be able to do something like that, so I just asked the group to think about that in the interim, because I don't think right now.
I have a question.
we can
I'm
hold
a
things up.
retired professional engineer, and I was reading this 5-page write-up. And one of the items says, a report by a professional engineer stating that the pole is structurally sufficient to carry the weight of the WCF and could withstand hurricane force. And it doesn't state what hurricane force. I guess that means up to 6. Winds without becoming a safety or a fire hazard. So I guess they have to provide that report.
And let me answer that question. Normally, when, in the building profession, when we are inspecting out of our scale, out of our scope, we will request a letter from an engineer saying that they have met all the requirements, and this is maybe the way to go. If there's a list of items that need to be spelled out, that they provide those documents that they have fulfilled those as a
I can
basis.
get you at least my version of that,
Sure.
Is that what
Okay.
this is?
based on the laws, not based on my imagination.
That's your B in this document?
It's B.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's B in the
Yeah.
document.
Yeah, E5.
Right.
Yes. Kevin, do you have a suggestion on how best to provide our committee with information that you have? I mean, it may be a matter of we don't know and we don't have it, and that's a whole series of questions that are that same answer. Would you recommend a sit-down at a an opportunity where we might be able to find out some of those things, or we don't?
Specifically, what things?
I'm sorry, the answers to questions that Heather and the rest of our committee may have about the application process. If there isn't an application process, really, that maybe we, with you, might be able to help work out what that application process might be. Does
Yeah,
that
I
sound
don't,
like a-
I don't think, the Director of Public Works doesn't own the application process, so it would start back here. And I get it to look at from a utility perspective and conflict of that. But, I mean, I'm a reviewer in that process, so.
Can I ask how the other 5 that were installed, how that process went? Because I remember reading something about it. But
Yeah, they kind of predate me, so I know they had submitted some sort of an application and gotten approval to do it. Maybe the commissioner, one of the commissioners might know. But that's, it was what I was here to show you, kind of, somebody had asked, where are they? The ones we have already. So that we have 7 approved sites. The 5 in red are the current existing ones, starting from the north, you know, one on the boardwalk, on one of the volleyball lights, 2 on Rehoboth Avenue, 1 around the bandstand, and 1 at 2nd Street, 1 on the corner of Wilmington and First, and then the one that sits on top of the Delaware Avenue restrooms, and then the 2 approved sites where we haven't had construction yet is the one at Hickman and 1 at Stokely.
I guess can you just go back to that picture again real quick? I guess my biggest other issue is that the 5 in red that are approved, that are installed, they're all in the commercially zoned area, and they were all residents were notified about this. It was part of a press release that came from the city manager. But the other 2, there was no notification of any residents, and they are in residential areas. So does the city have anything to say about that?
Director of Public Works does not.
Anybody?
Perhaps our communications department? Chris Johnson is the city's.
I believe this all predates that as well.
Yes, yeah.
For the first 5 or the new 2? Yeah.
Residential neighborhood. I don't think I saw anything either, but I think we can ask the question, and that should be part of the conversation, follow up with the city manager. Yeah.
And our
I
communications.
mean, I certainly would have brought this up sooner if I knew about it, and saved us all a lot of scrambling in the last few weeks, trying to get up to speed. If we had known about this, and maybe could have worked with you to come up with an alternative location that would have worked just as well for AT&T, and then wouldn't have presented all these technical problems that I just asked you all about.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it, Charlie. The next step for the group, Heather, is to sit down with the city manager and Dawn to discuss this.
And come up with like a list of recommendations.
What
Or whoever's interested.
what a process might look like, that sort of thing.
That's my recommendation, having been, in this role. So I think that's the way to get it done.
Kevin, do you want to defer from being part of that another committee meeting?
Yeah,
Escape that duty? Well, I would think that would be.
I'll go where the city manager tells me to go.
I see, that's good.
Is that Glenn? Is Glenn the city manager? Who's the city manager?
Sharon Lynn,
Thank you.
and Glenn Mandelis is our city's attorney.
Okay, solicitor.
Solicitor, yes. Heather, let me ask, does that seem like a next best step, or would you have another option?
Well, I mean, I
recommendation?
still would like to feel from the city that they're willing to uphold the federal law of the FCC, which requires this testing to be done before these things go up, and that you're willing to do something on the behalf of the residents who have questions.
I don't think that's an issue that we will object to. We are obliged to comply with any federal laws that affect us right now. We do with the FEMA laws and state laws. So I don't think this is going to be a problem. At least I don't see it as a problem.
What's not going to be a problem?
Well, in terms of abiding by the FCC regulations.
As far as the 2 permits that have been approved?
I mean, the ones that have been approved right now, I think they have I don't know if we could be retroactive, but the ones that have been approved vests. And I don't know if we could go back and tell them, hey, you got to submit all this information or we'll revoke the permit. I think prospectively, we could do that.
Well, I would ask then if the city would go back to AT&T and say, in good faith, would you, our residents and our committee has questions, would you please provide this information prior to installing?
Once I know the information that they have to provide, I don't have any objection to
I'll
it.
give you a copy.
Okay.
I actually now have a different question. Have these have already been approved?
These are in.
Installed.
Right.
Installed.
Oh my goodness.
And it's the part that's up at the very tip top, is that right, Kevin?
Right. Well, if you look at the one on your left, the one on the boardwalk on the volleyball light, you can see the panel box that's attached to it, and then the antenna's at the very top above the light.
Is that the one you mentioned that they didn't fulfill their obligation? They weren't supposed to put that panel on the pole? Is that the one you mentioned? It was supposed to go, the thing on the pole was supposed to go somewhere else?
Well, it has to kind of go on the pole. The other electric meter and things like that are over on an H-frame across the
The one
boardwalk
on
from
1
it.
Stokely Street?
No, this is the one at the boardwalk and Baltimore Avenue. And then the one on the right is at the corner of Wilmington and First. It's that black pole.
So they were actually supposed to put in aesthetically pleasing that fit the character of the town, and that, I have to be honest, this does not fit the character of the town. I have a serious issue with this personally, and I'll bring it up in our commissioner meeting. So there's many reasons we need to sit down, I think, with
Yeah,
the city
well,
manager.
your
I
next-
saw that on the boardwalk yesterday, and I thought it was just some temporary thing that was put up there. It's just, it absolutely does
Your
not
next one is
meet.
gonna go on top.
Yeah,
that
and to
lovely
have
pole.
that in the residential neighborhoods, I'm sorry, I have several issues, Heather's issues, about, you know, them certifying that they meet the requirements, but also the aesthetics. That's not what we were shown as what they would install at all.
And that's
So-
one of the things that we can
Serious
buck on
issue.
is the aesthetics,
That's
not
right.
on the
And
health
that's
and
pretty
safety, but
clear.
the aesthetics.
But both,
Right.
because
Because one
I want
leads to the other.
certification on the health,
Yeah.
and that is not what they agreed to put up there in terms of what they showed us.
But
And now you're gonna put it in the
the
residential
design
neighborhoods.
standards, that
Ed, can you
conversation.
approach the microphone?
Yeah.
Edward, excuse me.
Rochinowski, just to clarify, Commissioner, I believe that conversation about design standards and conditional use was after these were already up there. So I just want to make sure that from a process standpoint,
You are right. You are right, but I
So-
still would like to have that conversation before anything. No, these were just installed, right?
2 years ago. Year and a
These
half
were
ago.
2 years ago.
and it was in the early fall that we talked about design
Correct.
standards, and I just want to
Fellow
make sure that.
commissioner very politely and diplomatically corrected me, but he's right. But I still think it's worth the conversation, particularly as we move into the residential neighborhoods, to talk about aesthetic, to figure out something for aesthetics and for the health and safety.
So these are the two on
issues.
Rehoboth Avenue, one at the bandstand, one up by Second. So they tried as best they could to match the kind of the existing standards along the median.
And these all got installed the same time?
They're working.
Correct. About a year and a half ago.
Well, if we had a zoning ordinance, that would sort of codify some of this stuff and.
We do have this all codified. We
It's
have the
in-
design
oh, okay.
standards. They're required to meet the FCC health and safety regulations. That's all in an ordinance right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's in our new ordinance.
Oh, it's new?
Yeah, just as a few months
Edward,
ago.
can you
Okay.
approach the microphone?
The ordinance is there. They must follow the FCC regulations. In the ordinance, there's a process for inspection to make sure that they're continuing to follow. I think what you're questioning is the process. Did we make sure they were following the FCC regulations? Are we making sure that the design standards are met? And I don't think anyone here today can, without sitting down with the city manager, can answer those questions. So I think the next step has to be sitting down with the city manager and hashing out some of these details.
Is there
Whether-
a public notice provision in the ordinance?
As I just looked, I did not see that. Now, that doesn't mean that provision is in the FCC regulations. That I don't know, but in our city ordinance, it's not there.
The FCC doesn't require any public notification, but most ordinances that I've read of other communities, they do.
And
they do
that may
put
be
in
something
their
that we
ordinance.
want to entertain adding to the ordinance.
But I will say that the first 5 that were installed were announced by the city manager to everyone, and I think that's the good faith way to go.
Yeah,
And these other 2 in residential areas were not announced to anyone.
I don't think anyone's arguing with you about it. I just don't think that we can answer your questions properly without sitting down with the city manager.
And we can do that. She's back next week, correct? So we can set that up pretty quickly. I'm sorry, I'm now a little bit back. I'm not sure what's been installed and not installed. So you showed the ones that are installed on the red. I mean, in terms of the picture of what's been installed. So
So 1, 2.
But the Hickman and Stokely
Correct.
have not been
Correct.
installed, correct?
So the one the one on the left there is Hickman and Byard. It's where that existing light pole is. They're going to replace that pole with a similar wood pole, 40-foot wood pole. It'll have the antenna on top.
So-
They'll put a light on it just
Can
like
I just ask again, so nobody in the city had any conversations with AT&T about putting it in this particular spot? They just picked it themselves and you guys said, okay, there was no like process or anything? Because I know, I'm asking because the ordinance that you guys wrote specifically says that you're not to put them on the boardwalk except for some special exception. I don't know where it is now. So that seems to me like they were just trying to get as close to the boardwalk as they could without being on the boardwalk, and that maybe somebody would have had a conversation about that.
Well, I think the conversation about the boardwalk was more toward the aesthetics of it. So
Okay.
you have to match a look similarly to the existing poles.
Right.
So here they're replacing a wood pole with a wood pole. Now
So
the
they're
new
actually taking the pole down and
the
putting
new
in
wood pole will have the antenna on the top. So, but I think we would have a hard argument that aesthetically, from an aesthetics perspective, that a wood pole with an antenna on the top looks a whole lot different than a wood pole without the antenna on top. So I don't think aesthetically we would have an argument to say it doesn't meet the aesthetics of that neighborhood because there's wood poles all over the place. Same at the end of Stokely, a little tougher in that they want to go, here's the existing pole. They can't hang off, they tell us they can't hang off the existing pole because it has primary power on that pole, as opposed to a light pole, which just has the secondary power. So they want to install just at the end of the street, there's a no smoking sign there now. So there will be an additional pole right here that would have, similar to this one, it's a standard pole with an antenna at the top. So that's the two that have been approved.
And that's all in
to
the
do.
drawings that.
Correct, right. Yeah, in that, their application came in with those. And I think the engineering piece of that is in that packet as well, so.
I think that, Charlie, just as the chair, my recommendation maybe is that we just take an action, because I know you have a heavy agenda, and I'm not trying to cut you off at all, but I think these guys have done a super job answering questions on this new process. It's the first time the new ordinance is being applied, and I think we have some questions we all have to ask to help the city implement the right, approach here. So I would just recommend that we kind of take this to a meeting with the city manager and ask these
As to
questions.
establishing a process going
Exactly.
forward, and
Yeah.
perhaps asking for additional information from
Sure.
those that have already been installed. AT&T and the others may say, well, sure, we'd be glad to get you that information because we want to be able to get future things done with the
I would
city
hope
as
so.
well.
I hope so too, and then, so.
You would hope they'd be acting in good faith that way.
So.
The question is, the applicant is the AT&T. We need to identify who we communicated AT&T as opposed to the subsidiary who's doing the installation, because we're basically dealing with the subcontractors a lot of times. So are we placing that burden on the contractor, or basically making part of the application process, these things you need to submit, itemize and submit them to us? Which that would avoid having to go back to AT&T and have them having to ask them to provide it. It needs to be part of the submission package.
That's what you're saying.
AT&T, right? Is
Right.
making this, I think we go to AT&T, but we can work that.
Yeah,
out. That's a
okay.
really good
Dom, it would
point.
be helpful if you could give us
So-
the names of your contacts with them, because as a committee, we should hear from
We
all sides
could-
of an issue, and I'd like to invite some
Sure,
of those
we
folks from
could-
AT&T to come and tell us.
Sure,
What they can.
I can provide whatever I have with these two applicants, the names. Okay, again, the applicant is AT&T, but it's the subcontractor.
Well, the subcontractor will only build what AT&T tells them, we hope, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's got to go through AT&T. I mean, they're the
Right,
ones
yeah.
making the decisions. They really are. So we need to go get them to have a conversation with the city manager, figure out how to do that.
So that's as to the process of going forward and making application, that sort of thing. Is that something that you find to be an acceptable answer to some of your questions there? There are others that I'd like to hear from you though, Heather, which
Well,
is like
I
what
mean,
other cities and states have done and whatever.
yes,
That's
and
another
we
part of
can
the
continue
discussion.
that conversation maybe as a committee or however you would like to do it. But I just still would like to say that I feel like these questions all need to be answered before anything goes on a poll. And I really hope that we can accomplish that by doing what you said and meeting with the city manager.
And it may mean that the application would have a place where the applicant, AT&T, Verizon, whoever, would say, we have certified this to be true for all the FCC regulations, and here's some of the documentation that comes with
That's
it.
what I would like to
And
see
that
is
would
the
be part of the
documentation.
permit application package.
I agree.
Or it might be more
And,
complicated.
and it might be easy to meet with Sharon and develop some of those documents sort of all as this, that's going to be a process, I think, that they will each help each other go forward, so.
So that's as to the permit application. Are there a second topic, or?
Well,
I'm
I have,
interested in the review of what other cities and states have done.
I would love to go through all of that with you guys. I just found out, I want to share with you guys, that I just learned this morning that on the 19th of February, that Lewis has redrafted their ordinance, and they plan, and this is a draft, but they plan to insert a requirement that no wireless communications facilities can be within 40 feet of a residential dwelling. And so this requirement has been enforced by multiple other cities, and you have that in my report. I can list them all, but I don't want to bore you guys.
That
There's
seems
probably,
short.
I think there's 8 of them that have also enacted similar requirements. Some of them are 500 feet.
500 feet, yeah,
Yeah.
that seems short compared to these
So,
other ones. 1,500 feet.
Have they survived the legal
yes,
challenge?
in fact, I spoken to the representative at Fairfax, California, and they drafted this in July, I think she said, and they have heard nothing from anyone. It's fine, everything's fine. So just as an example, but I just want to also bring up to everybody that this is becoming more of an issue. In fact, I have here too some, Sharon asked me, or she asked me to look at what other municipalities are doing. Fenwick has addressed it recently. Ocean City, I think there was a meeting where people got upset and they had to leave the room. They had to come back and apologize to each other, which hopefully we won't get to that here. So this is a hot issue, and people are making changes, and I applaud Lewis for doing an update to their ordinance, and I think, as requested in my recommendations, that we need to do the same thing here. I think that would eliminate a lot of the problems. I don't know how you guys feel as a committee, but I don't have a problem with any of the red ones in the commercial zones. Those are necessary. We need to have those. And I would even argue that the one at Stockley Street that's serving the Boardwalk is, but in residential areas, I would ask AT&T, why is it necessary to have that there? Is there a need? Because I think you would find that we have adequate cell phone coverage. We all have an option of different cable providers to provide high-speed internet service. I've never had a problem in a residential area with that. So I would ask AT&T, why do we need this? Can you prove to us that this is needed? And that's something that other communities are doing as well. They're making the wireless communications facilities providers say, well, we need this here for a specific reason, and that's certainly justified. But I would say in this location that it's not.
I can appreciate what you're saying. The question is, we're talking about qualifying. Not only quantifying, but qualifying. And who makes the final determination on the qualifying?
Right.
Because I see it as out of the scope of my department.
Yeah, I feel for you guys. This is big.
I
It's
like,
I get it.
it's like asking me about aesthetics. We don't care about the aesthetics.
Right. You just
We
want to meet I got
We just
you.
care that it
Yeah.
doesn't fall.
Yeah, I got you. I hear you. And I think that's probably why this needs some work. But one way to ensure that we don't put ourselves in a bad situation is by giving our residents a little bit of room between us and these things until we get to a point where we can say, for sure they're safe, there's no problem, and we have a really good policy in place where we're checking, we're doing readings, we're doing measurements every year to make sure they meet the FCC safety standards, but we don't have those in place. So putting this in a residential area is very premature. It's risky.
Kevin had a question about whether any of these ordinances had withstood
Yes.
legal challenge, and it
Yes.
sounded like there hadn't been any challenges yet.
There haven't been any challenges to them. The biggest one is the ones that I brought up at the commissioners meeting. There are currently 2 lawsuits right now. There are 30 jurisdictions that are suing in federal court saying that the FCC has usurped their local authority is the word that's used. And in other words, they took away our right in Rehoboth to determine where we think these things should go. The other one is specifically from Montgomery County suing the FCC for exposing people to health effects of these small cell wireless facilities. So they're alleging that that's an issue. And both of those oral arguments were heard on the 10th of last month. I watched the proceeding. The judges did not look very happy with the FCC attorney. I can tell you, anybody can watch the proceedings. They're available to anyone. It's the Ninth Circuit Court if you're interested. But the ruling has yet to be issued. So those things, as you know, in federal court take a long time. So what we're doing here is a big issue. It's a big issue, you guys, and we really, I think, need to proceed cautiously until a lot of this stuff is decided. But that being said, there are smaller local jurisdictions who are taking action to protect their residents until this stuff is decided. So that's the recommendation that I put forward to you. You know, we can discuss that after or now, depending on how
Heather,
you
there's a
want to
lot
proceed.
there to unpack. You've done a great job of doing this research. We appreciate your efforts. Can I just ask one last question, which was to review for us what others and you as well have seen as potential health impacts from 5G radio frequencies? Is that something you can give us the thumbnail elevator speech on?
I can, and I think that's what I did at our last meeting. I think I did that pretty thoroughly, and I would ask that you go back and look at that if you have any questions. But I don't think we should bring that up here just because everybody that I've talked to, you know, it's kind of the elephant in the room, and it kind of has to stay that way. I think we all know about that, but we're precluded from making any decisions based on that, based on federal law. So I also think there are a lot of other compelling reasons why we need to address this issue. So, yeah.
Any other questions from any of our commissioners or our city staff? Dom, Kevin, Evan, commissioners, thank you very much for your input, Dom and Kevin. I know I promised that we'd bring this issue up first so that you could escape the rest of our agenda and go about the rest of your duties.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's busy out there. It's crazy out there. Lots of building going on.
Thank you so much for your
Thank
participation.
you.
Thank you.
Very good. If there are no other questions or comments on that topic of 5G and the WCF, I'll go on to the topic of our plastics.
Charlie, can I just say one more thing, just to the committee? I didn't want to make them all stay for this, but I just want to say this to you guys because I appreciate it. So I gave my presentation to you guys, and I gave it to the commissioners. And the commissioners and the mayor, just so you know, they asked us to review this as a committee, so that's why we're doing this. And I know this information is in a different format and seems to be a different topic than I first spoke about. The reason for that is the FCC law mentioned in my first report that prohibits any jurisdiction from regulating placement of wireless communications facilities, quote, on the basis of environmental effects of radio frequency emissions. So it must remain, as I said, the elephant in the room. But there are still RF requirements, the FCC and the FCC law that apply, as I mentioned before, and the city must enforce them. And there are other reasons why our community does have some say over where these things are built. The goal here is to provide the best environment for citizens. I've thoroughly researched the issue and believe the proposed limit to the small cells of 100 feet from any residential dwelling is our best option, and that's in my recommendation. We also need to ensure that the safety requirements the FCC does have in place are met. The city's ordinance does not have any specific requirements to do this, as we've just noted through this whole process of looking at the permits. So those are also included, and he left with the permits, and I really wanted to see them. The goal is always to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our residents. As I said before, the city announced the agreement with AT&T that a variety of locations have been chosen for the placement of these antennas to expand cell phone coverage. 5 sites have already been approved in our 1.64-mile city. While we appreciate the city's efforts to provide visitors and residents with adequate coverage, the primary goal should be to our residents. In addition, residents have access to high-speed internet in their homes. I don't know how many small cells it will take to provide us with adequate coverage. I have heard the number 18 in our 1.64-mile city, and it is my hope that the city can adopt a more cautious approach for its residents until the FCC updates its 1996 safety studies and the outcome of the 2 appeals in federal court are decided.
Any other questions for Heather? Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Yes, we can, a lively topic, if I do say so myself. I'm probably going to continue. Moving on to our plastics issues. I have prepared in the previous meeting a draft summary of the issue, proposed options that the city commissioners may consider. Want to take one and pass it around. I hope that this has reflected the most recent discussions we've had on this. We've had several different discussions on the topic. It may take some additional rewording or rethinking of what we have discussed in the past. There have been a number of, I've just found out from Mayor Coons sent me a message saying that New Jersey's Senate had just passed a bill which would outlaw plastic bags and paper bags too, in hopes of pushing people more to using reusable bags rather than disposing of either plastic or paper. To my mind, plastic is the greater harm, but that's one of the things that we had discussed previously. I believe, Stuart, you brought that up as a beneficial policy that we might have to, if not ban, as I understand it, our legal position here in Delaware is that we may not ban plastic bags or bags, paper bags, but we may put a fee on them. So we might put a fee on both the plastic and the paper in order to give an incentive, an economic incentive to move to reusable bags wherever possible. Or people can just pay the fee, and which is what many people may decide to do if that's what our recommendation is. So let me ask, you all had a chance to look at this. Do you think this proposed policy options, maybe we could just go down them one through 7 and discuss and see if anybody has any questions. I think the first one, banning the styrofoam cups, clamshells, other styrofoam single-use products at food establishments is pretty non-controversial. Is that fair to say?
No.
No.
My only question is, what does ban mean? Does that mean that we're going to have any enforcement, or, I mean, what does ban mean?
But I would think that you're absolutely right, Nettie, that whenever we have a ban on something, that there should be enforcement of that. How to accomplish that enforcement, I would imagine that our city officials would take the lead on that to the extent that anybody like civilians, like you and me, we see something going on, we can report that to our city officials and they can take what they believe is appropriate enforcement action, I would think.
My question is, I thought we eliminated food on that and just said establishments. Am I right on that or no?
I'd be glad to accept that if that's what the wisdom of our committee is.
Isn't that what we said?
What did you say?
That we eliminate the word food and just say at establishments? Isn't that where we were
All,
before?
maybe all
Yes.
establishments.
Okay. Are there other establishments besides food establishments which would have styrofoam cups or clamshells?
Well, yes, Rofo might sell foam cups.
Well, they're considered a food establishment.
Yeah,
I would consider
that's the
that.
thing, there was a.
I've read the state definition of food establishment, and it's broader than restaurant. It includes basically any place that processes or prepares food.
Okay,
So,
so how about a grocery store?
and they're a food establishment as well.
So that's, as long as we're
So to be
meeting,
clear that that is what it means?
I mean, we could reference this, the definition in the public health law, or basically, these are recommendations of things we want to do, but at this point, we're not telling the city what their enforcement scheme, we haven't put that in here.
Just so you know, we're not telling the city to do anything, we're
Right.
making recommendations.
We had talked about it self-enforcing. We didn't talk about the city or anything.
Typically,
That
if you-
people, that just because it's a good idea, it would slowly but surely take off, I think is really where we went.
Right, we went voluntary cooperation as much as possible. We're working with the business community. I do not see anybody using the heavy sledgehammer of enforcement on anybody. We're all friends here in this town. I hope we are. Commissioner Strauss,
Do you mind if I just say a word?
please, if you'll take the microphone.
I guess you might be better off just saying any commercial business, because I know there's at least one massage salon that I go to, and they have foam cups, to dispense water out of. So that's just one thing to think of. But I think my question is more, you're talking a lot about putting a ban and using legislatively making these changes. And I guess my question is, should we not first approach it from just a cultural behavior change with the business community using Main Street and the Chamber of Commerce and things like that, rather than coming at it from legislation and banning and enforcement? So I guess that's just food for thought in my question.
Well, my reaction to that is, I think we should do like the state did, and we put the law on the books with maybe a 1 year till it goes into effect, and then spend that year kind of working with people to get ready for it, and then we can have, again, maybe a warning system as the first offense or something like that. But I think we've been asked by SOLA and others to go in with the ban, and it was our understanding that maybe the city was ready for that, but we could have a transition.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I'm against, having an ordinance. I just think there's other ways to affect change too, and it may be quicker.
I think we agree with you. You may note in the summary up there, the last sentence says, an educational effort with a letter to businesses inviting their voluntary participation should be conducted before adoption of any code changes. So that may be meeting your issue. Would you like to see this?
Is that an extra one?
That's an extra one
I
for
know
you.
it's in your email, but thank you.
Wait, Roland. There's all sorts of extra copies, I think, somewhere. You send them around and there's an extra
I did.
copy here. Good. So there's a suggestion we strike out the food establishments and write in all establishments. That would take care of the massage parlor or anybody else that is handing out free styrofoam cups for whatever reason. Okay.
So, before we go on,
Yes, please.
we're talking about, it says carry-out clamshells, so we're not trying to avoid fiber clamshells. There's a lot of good stuff out there that local restaurants have started using already.
Yes.
Such
Anything that's
as-
not styrofoam, that's more like paper.
They just opened, they're using a fiber clamshells. So it just says carry-out clamshells.
Maybe
It
we
ought to
should
be,
add
it ought to be
styrofoam.
styrofoam.
It should have
Yeah,
said
insert
styrofoam.
styrofoam, yeah.
Now, once we start to rule out styrofoam, they're gonna go to plastic.
Right.
Well, a lot of places have put the term non-compostable in their statute or their ordinance,
It
which
needs to
includes
be-
plastic and styrofoam.
Okay,
Okay.
so
You want to change this to be plastic and styrofoam cups or plastic and?
whatever anybody wants, I'm not a legal person,
Well,
but people understand styrofoam, people understand plastic. They understand anything that's compostable. There is this place is using something that looks like plastic, but it is compostable. So whatever language,
Well, that's a step, that's an extra step for number one, in that there are a lot of establishments that sell plastic cups and they, pour their beer right into there, and that plastic cup it's everywhere. It's the red Solo cups, you may have seen them.
Yes.
In which case that would be having a greater impact on retail sales than just the styrofoam. I think a lot of places have already started moving to away from styrofoam to paperboard clamshells or paper cups like Starbucks does and others. I just don't know whether banning all plastic cups is another step we want to take or not, but I'm open to suggestions. What do you think?
I feel that we should stick with styrofoam, to be clear, on that first one for now.
Yeah.
Because if we have to specify, okay, styrofoam, but we, want it not to be plastic either, and then I think we muddy the waters here. I think what we're saying in number one is I think we should add styrofoam. No styrofoam clamshells. Yes, people will go to plastic, or maybe they'll be smart enough to.
And
do
we want
something.
them to go to plastic? I'm confused.
And we don't,
No,
we
so
don't,
it should
but I'm
be-
saying, I think that first one is not muddying the water about styrofoam. I think we're saying a very strong thing there about styrofoam.
I think we see styrofoam as one of the worst of the
Yeah.
polluters
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it crumbles into little pieces and flies
Yeah.
all over the place
Yeah.
and out in
And
the ocean.
we're
and
not
that sort of thing.
recycling
Yeah,
that
our
effectively.
intent for number one was about styrofoam of any type, for any use.
Yeah.
So let's keep styrofoam.
Yeah.
So maybe we
agree.
could add another number later on
Yeah.
For
about
plastic.
plastic cups
Plastics. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
and or plastic clamshells or,
Because I think that's really very clear. It's like, let's just add styrofoam clamshells.
okay, well,
Agreed.
back to Stuart. Stuart, do you
But
think
I'm
that we should
sorry.
add a number that's separate from the styrofoam cups and styrofoam clamshells and other styrofoams to say ban the use of plastic cups and plastic
Single-use plastic.
carry out and
Well,
plastic?
and only because when you look at the health situations and the environmental impacts, 2/3 of all the plastic ever produced on the planet is still here. It's still here. So, and it takes 100 years to start breaking down.
Let me stop there. there and say, remember, no preaching to the choir here this morning.
Right.
Plastic is
So
not good for the
I
environment.
would, and now, obviously, we're just making a recommendation.
That's right.
The commissioners can do, they can take this and do whatever they want with it, but.
Well, the title of the proposal is single-use plastic products. So we don't even address, in that first sentence, I
Right.
still have single-use plastic products.
Yes.
Did that come off? I have an old copy. So I think, yes, then so that's our first thing, styrofoam. Our second thing, I know this is the new one, or other styrofoam single-use plastic products, but what about just single-use plastic products? Do we ban those?
I think we should, first of all, I agree with everyone that the proposal one should be styrofoam. Because most people agree with that, and I think that will go through. And maybe we should maybe change what our title is to include
Okay.
styrofoam.
Uh-huh.
But I'll continue your conversations. I'm gonna say hello to our commissioners before they leave. Go right ahead.
So if you following me there, we have that on the very old copy. Oh, no, it's still on his new one. Or no, you changed it to other styrofoam single-use products. So my old copy said, ban the use of styrofoam cups, carry out clamshells, and other single-use products.
Right, it should be more inclusive, is what you're saying.
Right, or a separate number in and of itself. So
Sure.
we don't have the issue where they say, okay, I won't do styrofoam, but now I'll do plastic.
Maybe
Right.
we should say ban the use of styrofoam or plastic cups, carry out styrofoam or plastic clamshells and other styrofoam or plastic single-use products for all establishments, and the council can deal.
I think we have to be careful about single-use plastic products, because a lot of the sodas and stuff comes in plastic bottles, and you can't do that right this
Not
second.
yet.
Mhm.
Right,
You can't bite that,
Yeah.
we can't chew on that.
Right, it's too broad.
So
Unfortunately.
we still could do single-use styrofoam or plastic cups?
cups.
Yes.
Or styrofoam or
plastic.
clamshells? Okay, or styrofoam
You can't-
single-use
you can't-
products.
And there is so many people doing things in the realm of plastic packaging stuff, but
Oh,
we
God,
can't go
yeah.
there.
Yeah,
It's-
that's
it's-
true, it'd be
it's
way too much.
We can't, I don't believe on the first shot we can go there.
Okay. All right, well, I'll write that down for Charlie and he can decide.
So we're doing, number one is gonna be styrofoam.
Yes, right.
Or plastic.
Or
I
plastic.
think we should leave plastic out of number one.
No,
Okay.
I'm still there with that. Yes, I agree.
Okay.
And
Just
maybe make
styrofoam.
another number, Mary, you think? Another number for maybe ban the use of all plastic cups, all plastic
Plastic
clamshells.
cups. Yeah.
Okay, period. Could be another number.
Could be.
Just plastic cups. Okay. Alrighty.
Okay, are we down to two now?
And then ban the
And the
use of
plastic drinking straws, cup lids, et cetera, at
Oh, yeah,
establishments.
Maybe
Okay.
this could include a cup, plastic cups.
Oh,
coming
there you
Maybe we
go.
can stick that right in there.
Yeah.
There you go.
Although the straws, again, straws kind of have some support.
They
that-
do.
And I don't know whether the cups thing would drag it down or not.
What are people using now for coffee cups with the lids? I mean, what alternative do people have when somebody's having a takeout coffee?
They usually made a paper
Yeah.
There is a paper lid.
lid. No, the lid is
See, that's the
plastic
thing.
and the lid is not recyclable.
I know,
Mhm.
I know. So I'm
So
just-
what would they do? They can't put a lid on their coffee. That's yours. Because you don't have one.
Good.
Yeah.
What are they gonna do? Put a lid on it?
Right.
I'm sure some kind
So
of
we
lid.
can't ban the lid, can we?
If there's a way to do with a paper lid, that would, or some other,
Until it's been invented.
There is not a way that I know of, and here again, you wouldn't know this unless you do a brainstorm on this.
I think,
Because the paper,
yeah.
where you've got coffee at 140 degrees plus, the steam from it It starts to break down the lid.
Well, as I understand it, the coffee cup itself that I get at Starbucks is paper, but it has a light coat of wax on the inside to prevent the moisture from going into it. And then it has a sleeve around that so I don't burn my fingers while I'm
Right.
holding onto it.
Correct.
So I would hope that that would mean that the lid, if it were made of a similar paper with wax coating on it, would be able to withstand the heat that would come up to the top.
I think you'll find that that's not so, but I don't know that.
Well, I
But
stand
it'd be
corrected.
interesting to find, it'd be interesting to
I've
find
never
out.
seen one.
I've not seen
Yeah,
it.
I've never seen a lid that's not plastic.
I think then we should definitely isolate straws as a separate item and not confuse things with, you know, adding other categories that people are gonna argue about.
Okay, so we're striking cup lids, is that right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And the
I
et cetera.
mean, hopefully later, when we see them created, we could, or invented.
Maybe our research will turn up something in the next,
Yeah.
whatever.
But then I think definitely we need to add another number of banning the use of plastic cups, plastic clamshells, period.
Why don't you leave straws/cups?
Yeah.
Cup.
You want to make the two into ban the plastic straws and plastic cups? Or do you want to break them out separate? Maybe a 2A
Maybe.
would be plastic cups.
You got it right there. You can just put it right there.
Okay, Kevin suggests we put it right there.
I
And-
just have a quick comment. I'm sorry,
Yes,
just going back
Mr.
to
Schlosser,
the
go right ahead.
comment about the coffee cup lids. I can sit up here since I'm a.
Yeah.
Yes, you're part of,
you know,
I don't want to keep butting in,
No,
but I
we're
just
not
did a
butting
little
in.
We want
research
you
on this just really
Part of
quickly.
the family here.
And they
Lisa.
have biodegradable coffee lids now.
Nice.
So that you can buy, and they're biodegradable, plastic free, and
And
et
they
cetera.
work.
Pardon me?
They work all right?
Well, that I don't know. There's one 5-star
be careful.
review, but I'm just saying there are alternatives.
Okay.
out there. So
Nice.
it's not like there
Nice.
aren't any
Thank you.
alternatives. So I
Thank
just
you
wanted to
so
mention that
much.
to the group. So,
Wonderful, thank
Should we
you.
put lids back into our recommendation then?
Well, one thing that occurs to me just from some of the things I've been hearing in other groups that I've been involved, if we want to avoid a backlash from the commercial interests, we should be careful about lumping things together, that some of which they'll accept and some of which they won't. And so we know we have support for styrofoam straws and to some degree bags. And when we go further, which, and I think it's good to try, but when it comes to cups and lids and bottles, I don't think we've really discussed that with our businesses yet. And I think maybe that's something we could put in our Green Hero program, you know, because some of the businesses are starting to get those materials and try those. And I know there are some that do a really great job. You know, Rise Up has some stuff that looks like plastic, but it's not. It's, you know, and maybe we can suggest if businesses who use some of these better products, they would be singled out for a Green Hero. But I think because of the timeframes that we're trying to accomplish things, and now we're bringing some new ideas that we didn't float at the Chamber of Commerce. I don't know, we might get ourselves.
We're biting off more than we can chew? Is that
Yeah,
what you're
I think
saying?
so, you know, because now I'm hearing some of these ideas today that weren't really discussed previously, so.
Yeah,
It's not
I
the
think
low-hanging fruit that
Yeah.
Dee
I think
was
that's
talking
a
about. Yeah.
very valid point.
Maybe we could have a second tier recommendations for if the
Yeah,
commissioners want to go farther, here's some ideas, but we're having them as secondary recommendations.
I
Yeah.
like the idea of the Green Hero, though.
Yes.
That kept coming up in our climate conversations that we had at Epworth. A lot of people said, well, you should be giving, you know, stickers, blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
Mostly because what Mary just said, that was not something that was recommended to the business people who sort of said, okay, this isn't gonna make us crazy.
Could we list, just so it would be clear, it's not just a willy-nilly thing, these secondary things, is
Right.
we give this to the council, let's do this low-hanging fruit that people agree with, and then list a secondary, these will be people that deal with plastic lids and other plastic products, and, you know, it would be a second tier, would be the Green Hero. and have that as our proposal, so it's very specific. So if you're beginning to do that, then.
Yeah,
Right.
we want to encourage them to start getting rid of all plastic.
Yeah.
And people who do more than what the bags, the straws, and the styrofoam can be.
But I think being specific in this recommendation would be very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that did come up in our climate conversations, almost at every table. They really thought that it would be an excellent idea to have a restaurant scorecard or something where you could earn points and, you get accreditation as being a green restaurant, a green establishment. They thought that was a much nicer way to go, and I said, well, that's interesting. We've been discussing something similar.
Yeah, and
So-
somebody suggested that it get printed in the paper.
Right, they really
Here's the monthly
they
assessment,
really,
yeah, I like
was
that.
that was coming from the community, so.
Mhm.
And the chamber is really in favor of that. Carol's really into that.
Should we, so how do we handle number 2? Leave it as it is, plastic straws, and not mention cup lids or cups
I
for now?
believe so.
Yes,
I
let's,
believe
let's
so.
add the
But-
cup lids to the suggestion for the Green Hero, and I like
Yes.
that Green Hero. I like that way of putting it. Okay.
Okay, we'll do that for now, and maybe we get some hints and feedback from our commissioners. You should be more demanding of whatever, then we'll maybe revise that later on. Let's move on if we can to number 3. I'm trying to be
Yeah,
aware of
keep
the
going.
clock
Yeah,
here.
Absolutely.
3 is the 10-cent fee on all plastic and paper bags.
Too little. Too little.
Too little, 10 cents is too
I
little?
think so.
I was thinking it might have been more like 10 cents for the plastic and 5 cents for the paper,
Uh-uh.
because paper is preferable to plastic. A
No.
little bit, don't you think?
A lot, but now you're starting to add
Complex.
now you're starting to add complexity to it.
Yes.
And yes, we want to get rid of all this stuff, but and that is the way it should go. But now you're starting to make, it's 5 cents. It's just like the parking thing that happened here last year. Oh, it's 3 hours here, it's 4 hours here, it's 1 hour, it's a different, you can't, we're speaking to the 700,000 tourists, not to the 1,600 people that live here. So my suggestion, I like your idea, because I've been thinking about that too, but I mean, how do you try to get people away from the plastic until we can change the state law, which will have some effect there? I think it's just gotta be really simple.
Let me back up to Kevin. What do you think the fee ought to be if not 10 cents?
25.
25 cents.
That's what he said.
And you thought,
People might balk at
Who's
that.
got more than that?
I don't know.
Anybody else have a reaction to Kevin's
What does
suggestion?
Whole Foods charge for a bag? I
5.
think
Here
5 cents?
is what somebody might, I don't mind. You're starting to deal with
Give you
the
10 cents.
lower end of the socioeconomic scale, 25 cents for a bag. It's onerous. The state of California has a state law where you can only do 10, up to 10. Same thing, most of these states seem to be hunkering down at 5 or 10. Here again. But the real thing is eventually you got to, on a legislative level, you have to stop the stuff. And then, but this is a way to discourage, this is a way to encourage the use of reusable bags. And that, as we talked about the other night too, is an education problem, is an education solution. And it's never going to stop being an education thing. And we have tremendous opportunities on that level to do it.
Well, they say in the places that have tried the fees or done the fees, it's sort of almost like a symbolic thing where as soon as they put the fee on, all of a sudden people, stop using plastic. And not very many people actually say, well, I want the bags and I'll pay for the bags. So I don't know how hard it is to implement or how much money would actually people would be buying bags, but especially since it's not going to be a grocery store situation where you're going to come in and use, 10 bags. So I view that this fee system is not really, it's really going to be very symbolic, and there's not going to be a lot of fees collected, and people are just going to see it and say, oh, okay, I don't want the bag. So.
People will not want to pay that extra 10 cents.
Yeah, and even
they'll
when
be
they-
like,
yeah.
oh, come on, and then that'll get them in the habit of getting into the reusable bags to avoid paying extra money.
Yeah.
And once you're in the habit, we know then that's
May I interrupt to ask if Julie has a comment over here from the audience? Yes, please. Step forward to the microphone. Thank you, Nettie, for allowing me that interruption.
Podium just so I can put my things down.
Okay, that's fine too. And Julie, remind us of the organizations you're representing, please.
So, I don't know if now's really the most appropriate time because I know I was invited to be at the meeting, but my name is Julie Moreau-Wenger, and I represent the Delaware Food Industry Council. So I represent the pharmacies, supermarkets, and convenience stores in the state, and I'm also the executive director of Keep Delaware Beautiful. So I'm here in a dual capacity to talk about two different nonprofit organizations. One is a trade association representing business, and the other is a nonprofit that works on litter prevention, recycling, and beautification programs. So I feel inclined to talk about the bags at this particular juncture. So the Delaware Food Industry Council has been talking about bags since 2007 on a statewide level, trying to come up with a statewide policy, if you will. Moving the needle on this is unbelievably difficult, right? And people feel lots of different ways about this. I'm really happy that we were able to actually have the governor sign a plastic bag ban that will go into effect in 2021. There is a companion piece of legislation that is currently in play that we expect to get movement on this legislative session that will also ban paper bags. The conversation of what's better, what's worse, fundamentally for the environment, paper's worse. I hate to say that because we want to think that it's plastic, but it's not. Paper bags are worse for the environment than plastic bags are. So Representative Longhurst, the majority leader, is one of the proponents of moving the paper bag bill forward. I have internal communication from supermarkets that will tell you that buying paper bags is nearly impossible because so many municipalities have moved to banning plastic. There are not paper manufacturers out there. And the smaller the establishment is, the less likely you can even purchase paper bags in the quantity that you would need, right? Because supermarkets are kind of the big fish in that world, right? So they're buying in bulk, they're buying larger quantities. The smaller you are, the more expensive that becomes. So I would just throw that out there for you. I never saw this document until I arrived today, so I was just kind of trying to go through it piece by piece as I was sitting here. It's my understanding that when it comes to banning or taxing, that municipalities don't have the legislative jurisdiction to impose a fee on a particular product at point of sale. You have to be given that authority by the state, just like we went through last session and watched as municipality after municipality got enabling legislation passed so that they could increase their occupancy tax in the hotels in each area. You would have to do the same thing, and then you could impose a particular fee on paper and plastic. But today, you can't do that without state authority. That's my understanding.
Julie, can I interrupt for just a second to say that I understand there's a difference of opinion on that topic. We sought legal counsel on that.
Yep, I read that on the back. Yep.
And Glenn Mandela said it's legal to have a fee. He's our city accountant.
Yep.
And I also contacted Speaker Schwarzkopf, who's our representative here, and he connected me with the Attorney General's office and their legislative counsel. They likewise said it was legal because of the way the language of the plastic bag ban was written. They struck out the part about not assessing fees, and they interpret that to mean that the legislature did intend to allow cities like ours to assess a fee. So that's the legal advice I've been given. But I didn't mean to contradict you.
No,
There's
I'm
different opinions.
understood.
Yeah, I also would like to, I've done some research on this in Hawaii, California, all, and this is kind of a precedent, have all done, communities have chosen to impose a fee, and then finally the state, after they did that, came along and said, okay, I also talked with Representative Ernie Lopez, who said, with this particular item, begin it at the local level, and then the state will come along. So now, what we're saying is the state is tying our hands and saying, no, we can't do this. Whereas the precedent in some other states is that this is what brought the state along.
Correct.
So
We have to abide by Delaware state law, but.
Yeah,
that's all.
and you're
It's
completely
this.
correct. So there's like ongoing lists of every municipality that has imposed a fee on plastic bags or paper and plastic. And you're 100% correct that in California, in Hawaii, a couple of states have taken it upon themselves to create a statewide solution because it was too onerous for businesses to be able to operate in their state because it would be conflicting. Rehoboth says 10 cents, Lewis says 20 cents, Dover says 5 cents. For people that have multi locations, you can't operate a business that way. You need there to be some standard. So it was the retailers that actually went to the state and said, there's only 3 counties. We need a statewide solution. We would suggest, we would actually beg you to consider a ban of both paper and plastic because we think that that's what the state is going toward as compared to a fee. In the beginning of time, when we started this conversation with the state, we advocated for a fee. We advocated for a fee because we thought that that would change behavior the fastest. The state refused to impose a fee because it's a tax, and they refused to allow a tax to be imparted on customers, be it visitors and or residents. That's how we got to the ban. I will tell you the conversation started in 2007. We started with an at-store recycling program. From the at-store recycling program, we went to a curbside recycling program because this state did not offer a curbside program. We helped author that bill. We were the first veto under Jack Markell for the bottle bill, elimination, if you will, which then became curbside recycling. When it comes to this topic, I know an awful lot. I've been around a lot of meetings. I understand the difference of opinion on the authority now. I'm just telling you from a business perspective, adopting what the state has done makes a whole lot of sense because otherwise you're going to have to deal with the messaging to the customer, which is going to come at the expense of the business that is going to have to say, here it's 5 cents, but you walk across over here and it's 10 cents, and here it's 5 cents, and here it's just a ban. So I would just ask you, it will become unwieldy and very complicated if we can't all figure out how to move the ban forward. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you.
Julie, where did the language come from to not allow a municipality under 50,000 people to do their own ban? Because all we're trying to do is do what the state's doing, and they won't let us. Where did that language come from in the state ban that takes place in January?
So that's a very good question. It was an amendment, and the purpose of the amendment was so that there wouldn't be
Huge.
no, the idea was that there would be consistency as compared to everyone being able to do their own thing. So I can't answer exactly where it came from. It was written, I know, by Representative Longhurst folks and Representative Brady. I don't know.
I don't know if you can confirm this or not, but I think the original thought was that it was going to be a state program and not a municipal program. And the city of Wilmington, and it was only going to apply to large stores, and that's what it applies to. In a large urban area like Wilmington, they have all these little corner groceries and small stores, and it's not going to help them with their plastic problem, the state ban on large 7,000 square feet stores or more. And so I think the city of Wilmington managed to get themselves an exception, but nobody else. But they defined it as 50,000 or more, which is only Wilmington. So I
It
think
only applies to stores of 500 square feet
Yeah.
or larger.
So let me make sure I understand you. So they established that so the smaller stores didn't have to have such a heartache in trying to do it? Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
the law started as a ban only for large stores, 7,000 square feet or more. And then they decided to make an exception for Wilmington, up for 500 square feet to 7,000, because that's what's in Wilmington. That's my understanding.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And here's the thing,
Yeah.
it gives them the ability, right, to impose the
They
state.
haven't done it yet, as far as.
Correct. So local chambers of commerce, NFIB, National Federation of Independent Business Owners, as we were going through this process over years, most of them have been opposed to doing a ban on bags because of the cost to businesses. And because the smaller you are, the more expensive that bag is, you're not buying it in the same type of quantity. So I do understand that Wilmington had, I believe that Wilmington thinks they have a large problem with bags. And so they thought that this would be advantageous for them to be able to use the same guidelines, same format in city stores in Wilmington. I can tell you that the paper bag bill, which is live right now, is the companion piece. And if there was an amendment that we would want to add to that, because it does affect the same part of the code, that we could consider doing that so that smaller municipalities than 50,000 could participate in the same ban. I know that this governor and speaker and Representative Longhurst, I never want to speak for them. I do know that the only thing that has never been on the table with them is a fee. It's been the stopper of all conversation of, we're not going to tax our folks to use a particular product. So.
Thank you, Julie. We appreciate your perspective, and I hope that we can continue to work with you and get your feedback on what
Yeah, absolutely. Is there, like, do you want to hear about Keep Delaware Beautiful? Are you just going to continue going down this?
I'm sure we would enjoy hearing about Keep Delaware Beautiful and our governor, who has promoted the Keep Delaware Litter-Free program. But I think that we're going to be behind the 8 ball for today on that. If there's materials or anything you want me to distribute to people, you can connect with me by email or whatever. Is that all right?
Sure, no problem. I will send it out to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie.
Did I cut you off, Nettie? I'm sorry.
No.
When I called on Julie, I saw her waving her hand over there behind you.
I think the reason Hawaii and California came along is this very reason that Julie brought up. Thank you, Julie. That this is such a controversial issue, and they didn't want to have to deal with the mess of it anymore. Therefore, they came out with a state law. If we have the courage to do this, we might provide the mess that forces the state of Delaware to take an action.
There you are. We'd be leaders and showing the way.
That's right.
Interesting perspective. Kevin, are you going to go along with us on 10 cents on everything? That's okay? All right. Is everybody sort of on board with that? 10 cents, and that's on paper and plastic? Is that our recommendation there? The question then might arise, well, where does the money go? Does some of it go back to the business?
That's a very good one.
Us, of course. No. Probably some go to the business. The business could get some of that money and maybe
Well,
some
Glenn
to
was
this.
saying, I thought Glenn said that it goes to the city, and the city decides whether it goes to a general fund or.
She comes again.
Oh.
She should just
Oh,
sense
of
fear
the floor.
spread across the committees.
Just a thought. First of all, I'd say let the business keep it because they're the ones that have to buy the bags. So,
Yeah,
and then
and
it's
it would
not a
help them.
tax, so you avoid that whole issue of a new tax.
Plus, it's easier administratively.
Yeah, absolutely. But number two, just a thought. It'd be kind of cool, like if we did something. And I don't know how this would manifest, but where we work together with Main Street or the Chamber, and we come up with kind of a a bag, environmentally friendly, reusable bag that promotes like Main Street and the businesses and such, and give the business owners the option of imposing a fee or the purchaser, the option of paying a fee or paying maybe 50 cents for this bag or $1. I have no idea how much it would be, X amount, or pay a 10-cent fee or something, doing something like that. So as we're thinking about the actual program we're going to propose, maybe give them options to do that, and then we can talk, and it may be the stupidest idea in the world, but I'd like to consider this group putting it as an option for the paper we take in front of, the Calm Chamber and Main Street. So that promotes Rehoboth, promotes the environmental friendly approach.
Reusable bag, that's what advertising on it, is what you're suggesting.
Exactly. And then maybe if they come in with a bag, the homeowners, or excuse me, the business owners give a discount or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
$3 on the bag?
Yeah, something like
just
that.
it could be a-
Yeah,
be a
exactly. whole
souvenir. It
program.
could be when,
That's right.
What
So
would the
pay
bag be
10
made of?
cents or pay 50 cents or $1, whatever, and get this nice bag that if you reuse it at other businesses, you get a discount.
Well, I spent my summer in Rehoboth Beach and all I got was this lousy
Exactly.
bag.
I knew you'd have a good idea, Charlie. I knew it.
Maybe they could use the 10 cents on the paper or plastic bags that are sold and use that to buy down the cost of the reusable bag, so it'd be less expensive to buy a reusable bag.
That probably is a good idea. It's
I think
confusing.
that's way too
Very
Too
complicated.
complicated.
Well, they can do that on their own.
Well, I think we kind of,
Bag is a huge
I think we kind of
educational
anticipate, that people will be wanting reusable bags
Yeah.
if there is a 10-cent fee for plastic.
right.
And so that's an opportunity for businesses to sell them. We did talk about
And this
that.
wasn't my idea, so somebody said it, I don't remember who it was, so I'll give credit.
If it turns out to be a good idea, we're giving the credit to you.
Yeah,
Lousy
give
idea.
it to somebody else.
It
I
was a
just,
lousy idea, it was my idea.
wasn't my idea, so it's somebody who I thought it was a great idea. So anyway, as
Yeah.
part of the program
Yeah.
proposal or policy proposal, maybe give businesses that option.
And you're welcome to stay seated right there.
Yes,
Yeah.
really.
she's getting
You may
her
have-
Oh, here, I'll
10,000
keep
steps in.
talking, so I don't want to do that. I want to try and listen to everybody.
Well, should I presume that we have
Yes.
agreed on a 10-cent fee on all plastic and paper bags to encourage the use of reusable bags? Any other edits to that number 3 there?
Or an option.
Or option?
Option for the purchase of a reusable Rehoboth bag.
I like that.
Something along those lines.
Mm.
And then
Encourage
maybe to be coordinated with Main Street, so we're not just imposing it, we're talking about it.
Okay. Number 4, ban helium balloon releases. I would note that the Grotto's Pizza has already agreed to do that voluntarily, which is great. And I think I had testified before the state legislature in Dover on the statewide bill on banning helium balloon releases, defining it as a form of littering, so that you'd get a $25 fine or $50 fine or something for the first or second violations.
It's a state law. Is that
There's a-
passed?
No,
There's a Senate bill going through right now, Senate Bill 208.
that's the one I testified on. It's not a law yet, no. But
Okay.
we hope that it will be successful. But in the interim, we can go ahead and
We
make
can
our
be the
own
leaders.
recommendations, and we can be leaders here in Rehoboth. And if it doesn't pass this year in the state, maybe we will get something passed, and then the state will follow our lead, or wait for us.
Yeah.
Are there any thoughts on helium balloon releases that we need to modify that? Number 4? Hearing none?
None.
I will move right along to number 5, which is to require. Now, I'm having some feedback about the word require, making that maybe strongly recommend that city staff and commissioners drink water from the water fountains or use their reusable water bottles rather than doing all those other things. I will report to you that City Commissioner Lynn pointed out that we do have refillable bottle stations with the drinking fountains that we have in the staff areas. Is that right, Ann?
Yes.
And that it's not in the public arena. I would like to recommend that we have refillable bottles for the public, like me and other people, so that we could do the same. But it sounds like that Commissioner Sharon Lynn has said that she would find that to be a fine thing to do. To say, look, let's just not buy any more of those case lots of plastic bottles and encourage all city staff to use their reusable water bottles. So I was encouraged by her positive response.
I think I would reword paragraph 5 to sort of acknowledge that since the city has 3 water refilling stations, our recommendation is that city and staff and commissioners are strongly encouraged to use those and refrain from using single-use plastic and, encourage, but not require, but mention that, they have 3 of these things, and so therefore it would be really easy for them to do that.
How about saying, and use the 3 existing refill stations? She's back.
Something you really do know.
Oh, I'm sorry, before you said, Julie wants to approach the microphone and share something.
So I just would ask that you consider adding an exception for state of emergencies, tornado, hurricane, weather issues, epidemics, pandemics. I'll tell you, spending tremendous amount of time on Corona with pharmacy, food, and fuel, and the idea of pushing people toward communal right now is not really where the rest of the world is trying to push people to. So you need to consider that, because this actually says we will not, suggest that the city not purchase. You should be in the business of buying bottled water when you need to, and not preventing that from happening by codifying something that doesn't allow you to help your folks.
That seems like a reasonable proposition.
That
If there's an
does,
emergency, we might do
definitely,
something
in an
differently. Does
emergency.
anybody object maybe after that sentence that says the city shall not buy single-use plastic bottles except for emergency situations?
I think for everything. I mean, I think if we're in an emergency situation with coronavirus, none of this. I mean, if we're trying to save lives, I mean, of course.
You can't get in your own way
Yeah.
of being able to do that. So you just need to watch the language, is all I would suggest.
Along that line, I would note that I brought my refillable cup to Starbucks this morning, and they said, Charlie, I know we'd like to give you your 5 cents off for reusing and said, we don't accept that during this time period until the coronavirus goes away, and then you can start using your reusable cup again. But for now, I have to have it in a paper cup, which makes sense. During an emergency, I'm willing to go for that.
Interesting.
And then I thought that was a nice policy on their
Yeah.
part.
Interesting.
Lisa, you approached the table. Do you have a thought?
Well, I'll ask for your thoughts, actually. One of the things that the city does is when we have meetings, and we sit up there, they put a water jug, whatever, and then styrofoam cups for us to use.
Not a good
Sorry, but,
even with coronavirus, I don't think we can start.
so I'm wondering if, did you, somebody say something?
I
Yeah,
just
so-
said even with coronavirus, I don't think we
Yeah,
need
so I'm
to
saying
start
maybe,
from cups.
or use paper cups if necessary, or something along that. You just might want to say that, but I think that's something Sharon can just do, but that just might be something to think about, how we would resolve that issue. I really think it's a matter of just saying, hey, Sharon, can we buy paper
Don't
cups
buy
instead of
single,
styrofoam
yeah.
cups?
Right.
But just for your awareness, that happens, so I have to admit it.
Well, banning the use of styrofoam cups under number 1 at all establishments, probably could say all establishments and city facilities.
I love it.
Wow, this is getting to be a really mess.
We've been working on this a long time.
We have-
But
I
it's
think I would
so
say like it should be
important
okay
because
by
this
now.
is our final draft before we submit it to the council.
Right.
So
We wanna get it right.
it's so important.
So here we were on number 5, where we added the except for emergency situations about the single-use bottles.
I think you should work on a complete reword of that, Charlie.
Okay.
But I think we all know what it should be.
How about except for emergency situations as the first phrase
Yes,
before we start anything
in the
into
whole thing.
number 5? That would apply to everything in the whole number 5.
Yeah.
But if you've got a different phraseology, Mary, I'd be happy to.
Well, I think,
Get your
and
recommendation.
also, another one of the commissioners had expressed a concern with the word require on city staff, and that we're not trying to regulate individuals here, we're just trying to say what materials the city should have in their facility. So like, if somebody comes in from home with a plastic water bottle, that's not good, but it's not what we're after. What we're after is for the city as a entity not to be acquiring cases of water and handing them out or or buying styrofoam. And what we're asking is the city government to do something, and we're not really regulating individuals.
That's why I was gonna suggest change,
Yeah.
require city staff to strongly encourage city
Yeah,
staff.
yeah,
Is that okay?
so, yeah.
I often
better.
take a plastic bottle to the Y with me
Yeah,
and I
that you're
just
reusing.
refill it
Yeah.
at the station because I'm such a spacehead. I forget my
Yeah,
my
a lot of people
expensive
do that,
stuff.
But you always
So-
have a plastic bottle with you in your purse somewhere or
So,
something?
I just,
Ever
you know,
go
I
out
had
without
one,
your
and I
bottle?
mean, that's, I've had the same one for a very long time now, but the point being to use the facility provided refill station is what we're trying to get people to do versus, right? Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying?
well,
Yes.
I think one of the things we were trying to stop is that the city buys a lot of cases of
And just
plastic.
passes,
And
yeah,
just
gives
gives them
us
out to
it
people.
on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, and so, yeah.
Showing leadership that way. Fine, any
Is
other-
there an alternative to plastic water bottles, right? I mean, so can you now buy like, I don't know, bamboo water bottles or something like bulk? I just don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
No,
No, not yet. Do you know?
that's a nice water bottle. Whose is that?
This one?
It looks like wood, but it's.
It looks
Right.
like wood, but it's not.
It's steel or.
Yeah, Lisa, where you get into a huge cost issue when
Okay.
you start going to other things, and that's, this whole issue, even if you were to ban plastic straws, you go to all this stuff that we're talking about, fiber, this restaurant that did this seed eatery that Dimitri's got fiber clamshells and everything, they're like 4 times the cost of the plastic and the stuff they're replacing, so it still needs to be done. That doesn't, but we just all need to be sensitive to, the businesses have to thrive. And that's why they need to be part of this, they need to be part of the conversation.
That was another thing I was just gonna
And
add. So
Carol
this-
and I talked with, it
Yeah.
needs to be a brainstorming session with businesses.
And I would suggest you do that before you submit this.
The solutions are right, that they have the solutions.
I would suggest that we set up, and Edward and I can help with this pretty easily, that we set up a brainstorming session with the
Hugely
chamber and with Main Street before, to go over this. And so you can submit the recommendations, we can submit our recommendations that say that we've incorporated the chamber and, the Main Street recommendations as well.
That way they're not
Language
blind.
of
Yeah.
this.
I would highly recommend it.
As opposed to
Again, I can
our,
help.
we did meet the chamber,
Well, we
on
made
a
a
higher
pres-
level sort of discussion. It wasn't really in-depth like this is.
I would have a brainstorming session, have an open meeting.
I would still do that. Yeah, we did a
Before we- yeah.
presentation to their advisory committee,
Yep.
and I thought they were very positive about it, but I still think the additional step would be hugely beneficial to everybody.
I agree.
Other thoughts on that topic? Good, that's 5. 6 and 7 are ones we've sort of discussed already, working with the business community, green heroes, all that sort of stuff. Looking through 6, any thoughts on 6? Any thoughts on 7? Hearing none,
Excuse me, for the Green Hero, I think it would be good to say some of these specific things like plastic cups, plastic clamshells, plastic lids, and, maybe some other stuff in the future.
how about that last phrase under 7 where it says e.g., for example? If a hotel
Okay.
installs a water bottle, we could just add the cup lids and things right along with
Okay,
that.
okay, yes, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you said one or more of those things, the green hero would be one or more of those things would qualify you for a green hero? Is that?
That's what is written
One
here,
or
one or
more.
more, yes.
I
Would you
would-
change that?
I would say someone needs to do more than one thing to get a green.
Yeah, I
And we
think
need
so
to,
too.
we need to kind of clarify what that is, and it should be like probably 3 of them, because everybody you could do one thing and it cost you nothing, and you're gonna get the same award as somebody like Rise Up or Seed Eatery, their costs are way higher.
Maybe we could have 5-star rating and you get 1 star if you did one thing, and you get 3 stars. Too complicated?
Too complicated,
Don't go
too
there, buddy.
complicated.
One thing I had thought of is that we can, when we establish a Green Hero Award, we can put it out to the businesses that we have one and tell us what you're doing if you want one, and then we decide do they deserve it and give it if they do. You know, just say, we have this new program in Rehoboth, the Green Hero program, for people who are doing more. And if you want one, just tell us what you're doing.
I kind of like that, but I think it's kind of willy-nilly, and I think people won't know, you know, it will be very subjective.
Yeah,
They'll
well,
say,
that's
what do I
okay.
have to do to get this thing? And we won't have a
Yeah,
ready
it'll be
answer for it.
subjective, whereas if we said, if you use plastic cups, plastic clamshells, and get away from plastic lids, then you get the Green Hero. And we'd like to look at other things too, but those are the beginning, maybe the
Yeah,
beginning.
we need to spend some time, Claire, working on that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't do that at this meeting.
Yeah.
So we'll agree to put a hold on that, on the number 7, exactly what qualifies you for the Green Hero Award, until we think about that some more. And we're also gonna be talking with the Chamber and the Main Street about that also, so that'll be a question mark in that
Okay.
area, sort of.
Okay.
We're still flexible on that. Do we need to change anything in the rationale write-up or anything on the back? It's experiences from other cities, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if we find that to be in need of any, I mean, it really doesn't carry any weight, unlike the actual options. But
No, I don't think we need to change anything.
if you do find that you'd like to have some phraseology changed, let me know, and
I think this is
I can
fine.
change it.
I think
Your
this is
secretary.
great.
No, I don't have a copy of this, so I am assuming, no, you will. I am assuming that you will send me. on
Yes,
this,
I will
have a
take my
back sheet.
scratchy, scratchy notes, put them into a better form and send it to you and everyone.
Okay, so we are going to leave out 7 for a later
Just one
time.
clip here that, like I said,
Paragraph
just
7,
scrap paper.
is that what we're gonna do?
Not so good at Xerox.
So I'm just gonna put in the notes again that Charlie is going to do all the revisions and pass them by us.
No, we're not taking 7 out. We're gonna modify 7 to clarify and leave it sort of open-ended still,
Okay,
pending further discussion as to
Okay.
what exactly is
Okay.
gonna go into the Green Hero. Yeah, we're not eliminating number 7.
So I'm gonna write in the notes that you're gonna make the modifications and you're gonna pass it by all of us.
Yes.
And that's all that's gonna go into our minutes. And then if there are any changes, you get back to Charlie about it.
I'm agreeing to be your scribe on this
Okay.
topic. Single-use plastic products, but not everything. So
Just
there.
this.
okay.
Okay. are
So
there-
is number 7 something we should work on just by ourselves and think about before our next meeting? Or what would you suggest on that?
I would suggest that you think about it, and if you have actual language that you'd like to have incorporated into this,
Okay,
I could propose that in brackets as optional language,
okay,
and then we can take all of that to the Main Street and Chamber of Commerce.
okay. Sounds
For
like a
the,
good
before
plan.
the final. Mhm.
Okay, but we are going to submit this as is to the next council meeting.
I don't know if that's a fact. I think what we wanted to do first was clean this draft up and talk to our Chamber of Commerce and Main Street folks first, and then bring it to the Board of Commissioners. Is that what you would prefer?
And
Lisa?
it doesn't have to be a long process. We could probably set something up, I would think even next week with the chamber.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, because
We'll
we
help with
have
that.
discussed this
I know.
into,
I know, but believe me, it really helps to get their endorsement when we're going
Yeah.
for the full board, so Edward and I can help with that.
Okay.
So,
Oh,
we can get that set up, we can work with Charlie and get something set up and let everybody know.
Okay, I hear a sigh of exhaustion on your part, Nettie, and I sympathize. And I know that SOLA 3 and the Rehoboth Beach Homeowners Association has been pushing us to go
Yeah.
faster, and here we are going more,
even
Well, we
slower
went
and
to number
slower.
7. I mean, we're getting there.
we're getting,
Yeah.
we're doing
We're
great
doing now,
here.
we're doing it.
I would suggest just dating.
Let's not
Dating,
get
yes.
discouraged.
And I'm sure to some people, this will seem like light speed, not slow.
I think that it is, compared
Yes.
to a lot of stuff that happens in this world. Justice delayed is justice denied, though, so let's get going. So if there are no other comments on our draft single-use plastic products, I would like to see if we can move on to some other agenda items. Number 1, I wanted to remind you of the April 4th gathering at the Convention Center. We're invited by the Planning Commission to participate in that April 4th Expo. It'll be an opportunity for us just to meet other people and other committees, other planners who, the Planning Commission is sort of leading the pack, if you will, in that they want to draft up a new comprehensive development plan, and they want to get the input from all, the tree committee and the everybody else committee. And so if you can attend, some or all of that, that would be great. You don't have to be there the whole time, though.
I'd encourage you just to attend that, even as, who's all the in-town residents on the group here? Especially, you know, everybody, but especially the in-town residents, because this is gonna impact for the next, you know, decade, the things and priorities in our town. So as part of this committee, definitely attend, but I really encourage you just as a citizen of Rehoboth to attend, so you can help, you know, give input to where our city goes. I'll put that plug in.
Now, Charlie, before you go into, I had some new business, and that's really quick. I don't know if you wanted, all right. One of the correspondence, it kind of relates to correspondence, but some people in the city are complaining about certain areas of the city where there's idling that, and.
That was on my list too, yeah.
Oh, okay, so I've done a little research, and, you know, there's a state law that precludes idling of heavyweight vehicles administered by DENREC's Air Division. So it's a little bit indirect for people who just happen to see a truck idling in front of their house, like they want it to stop. They have to call a number in Dover and report it and whatnot. And so what I discovered was that the City of Newark put their own local idling ban in effect that covers all motor vehicles except, you know, emergency situations and some other exceptions with, you know, maybe extreme cold weather or something. But it's a very straightforward ordinance that they were praised by the state. There was no issue of whether they could do it. DENREC said, look what Newark's doing to prevent air pollution. So I want to suggest that we put an local idling ban on the books.
There is one.
If that's a thing.
Is
The
it?
city has one.
They
Oh,
do?
okay.
And it's so because people say they call the police and they're like, well,
There's nothing we can do. Huh?
yeah, like they get ignored. So maybe we should try to.
There was an ordinance that was written.
Maybe
For the
I can,
city.
maybe I can ask if you could look that up for us, and see the code provision.
Not here, I can't.
Oh, okay, well, later perhaps.
Well,
Or
this,
maybe-
this is also a topic that should be an agenda item for your next meeting, because you're off topic right now.
Well, right now, we have on here my proposal for climate action, part of which would be reducing the low-hanging fruit of idling,
Yeah.
which is on the draft proposal for climate action, which I was going to find out next.
Yeah, and also, Ann, it's part of correspondence that we've received.
Well,
This
let
one.
me explain correspondence. When correspondence comes in, that's for all of you to know what has come in. It's not to have detailed discussion about each topic.
Well, we certainly are having a discussion about idling, and maybe, Mary, I can ask you to look up the city's code on that
Okay,
and see
so
what it
well,
says.
maybe we should put it on for the agenda. I'll suggest then we have it as an agenda item for our next meeting.
And I would love to have the part of our draft proposal for climate action,
Okay.
if I may.
And
Yeah,
might I
yeah.
suggest that you also invite Chief Banks to come in?
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
guess it's Chief that does the enforcement of idling in the police department.
Who else?
I was wondering if it was Dom, because they split enforcement of those things, but I think it's the police.
That'd be the police department.
Okay, so maybe I would suggest having a representative, Chief Banks or one of his representatives come in. And
We
you talk
would
a
love
little
to
bit
have-
about,
yeah.
so you can invite him. He's fantastic about participating, letting you know what he's doing with enforcement or not doing, or hearing the groups.
Okay, so what I guess what I'll do then is submit to Ann all the written materials or the ordinance copies or whatever we could put to your to look at and discuss next month.
I can include that in my draft write-up of the agenda, which I give to Ann.
Okay.
And she puts it here in our formal agenda, which works pretty well, I think.
Okay,
So that's good to find out that we have these city ordinance on that.
I don't know why like I was actually trying to find out what was going on in Delaware and I didn't get a hit for Rehoboth Beach, but.
Very good. Well, you've got before you the little smiley sunshine guy here with his yellow face. I'm counting on Kevin to be my strong right arm on the climate action as a solar guy and an engineering person as well. Part of which will have to do with transportation emissions. Part would have to do with building emissions. Part would have to do with energy from coal-fired power plants. Of course, we don't have any coal-fired power plants here in our city, but putting up solar energy on the roofs of houses will help to reduce the pollution that's caused by power plants elsewhere. Soils can absorb more carbon dioxide. That ought to be part of our plan. Tree planting, all those sorts of things could be part of this plan. So I don't want us to have us spend very much time on this at all because it's 5 minutes until the hour, other than to say, here it is, and please look at it, and maybe we can make some progress on discussing some of these things in the future. But looking at it just quickly, does anybody have any immediate reactions, thoughts, or comments on the idea of having a climate action plan?
The only immediate reaction I have is that we could try to suggest that, and I don't know whether Evan Miller would be a good one, that if he knows of funding, whether Reggie or some of the other, seems to be very knowledgeable about various grants and funds that the city can maybe get to do something like this. And that would be a good start to identify that we could get a grant to do this.
Good, that was my number one up there, which is Milton Newark got Denver's money.
Yeah.
So developing a plan is not easy, but I was just reading this morning about, it's all included in our correspondence for next time around, which was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, has come out with their Climate Action Plan 3.0. They've been working on this for a number of years. Back in 2007, they had Climate Action Plan 2.0. So it may be that we, likewise, will be going through several iterations of what should be in our climate plan, although I'd like us to move ahead quickly because the climate is not waiting. It's going right ahead and getting worse and worse. So we need to take prompt action. If we could just sort of copy what Pittsburgh has done and learn from their lessons and go right to the head of the class or even do better than they are doing.
Just copy them.
That would be, I think, a good way to go. Other thoughts?
Yeah, sometimes it's good to find a place that's similar and then see what they're doing and cut and paste from there.
You're right, we don't have a lot of time to catch up, so
It's hard
I
to
think
create
that's a
from
great way to
scratch.
do it.
Yeah.
And as Julie was pointing out earlier, she's left. It's unusual to have one city have one plan, another city have a different plan. It'd be good to have our plan be considered or adopted by the Association of Coastal Towns so that we might have a uniform approach and a uniform messaging and educational programs with everybody from Fenwick Island up to Lewis or wherever, so we can all be part of the team spirit.
That'd be great.
Any other thoughts on the climate action plan here? Good, so if you have thoughts or comments or edits or anything, send them to me and I will revise it. Now, we do have some other things on our list of proposed future projects, including the idea of being the bird, bee, butterfly, and bat friendliest place in the whole state of Delaware. We've got a lot of other things we could start working on, and if anybody would like to tackle other programs and put together a talking piece like this little smiley yellow face guy on that, or other topics, I would be glad to have you be, the point person on that for our committee. Anybody here want to? I asked Susan Morrison, who's not here today, I'm sorry to report her health is bad. She wrenched her back or something like that. I wish her well, but she had initially indicated she would like to be involved in, if not leading, the gardening and all that sort of stuff. Although I know that Heather's very fond of educating us about Roundup, so you might very well be part of that. I know you've got your plate full.
Heather's
stuff
you've
right now.
already done some work with talking to city staff about their use of pesticides, right? So you
Yes, we
kind of
had a
have
little
handle on that.
conversation about that. Yeah, we got some information, so.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not gonna ask that you put together a proposed paper, or talking piece like that on that. Any other thoughts or questions before we end here? I'm gonna call for any citizen comment out there. There's no one there. Any final comments from the committee members? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all so much.